So my talk title this morning is God in 3D. And recently we had our 7-week program where we studied the book, Is Your God Big Enough, Close Enough, You Enough? And I want to sort of piggyback on some of the ideas that we talked about back then. If you remember, we talked about the infinite God beyond us. We talked about the intimate God beside us. And then we talked about the inner God as us. And so I want to sort of bring that idea back this morning as we enter into Christmas, so that we look at God from that perspective again. Christianity's familiar and beautiful Christmas story depicts a heavenly Father sending his Son to be born in the world to save people from their despair, and who sends them his spirit or consciousness to comfort and to guide them in their own lives. And it's a warm image of God as a loving Father, a self-giving Son, and an ever-present encouraging Spirit. However, that traditional depiction only portrays a one-dimensional God in metaphors of personal relationship limited to male images of Father and Son and a kind of gender-neutral spirit, although the word in Hebrew and Greek is actually feminine. And it's true that God is revealed in these images, but it is also only a partial image. Today's scientifically complicated, cosmologically informed world longs for a God who is bigger than the men upstairs. That doesn't really work anymore. A God closer and more real to us personally than just some figure in an ancient history story, and more like us than only a heroic Superman type figure from the past. The new Christmas story pictures a God in 3D for us. So we're going to take a look at that. These three dimensions of God begin with the infinite dimension of God, who is everywhere and in everything and throughout history. And this God, who is beyond us, is born into a world in a breakthrough way as an intimate dimension of God in Jesus of Nazareth. The baby boy grows up to embrace and manifest his own humanity and divinity, lives, dies, and lives again to walk beside us. And he continues to lovingly whisper into our ears, into our souls, the magnificent revelation that every person, like him, carries the divine image within them as the inner dimension of God. So we have a fuller representation then of how God manifests. And since it's almost the Christmas season, I want to focus on Jesus as an expression of the intimate dimension of God. We'll leave the other dimensions for another time. But first, the often claimed and supposed exclusivism of Jesus as portrayed in the New Testament must be addressed, lest one hears something different than what I'm saying. I'm not presenting Jesus in the way, for instance, that it was kind of presented in that cute cartoon that we played at the beginning of the service. Jesus was a universal figure or person living in a specific time and place, it is true. His adoring followers made claims about him that he never made about himself. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Now, we can think about this, for instance, very often the language of love gets a little carried away. And someone might say to a partner, "You're the most beautiful woman in the world," or "You're the most handsome man alive." And so too, the early Christians, lost in their passionate love for Jesus and their exuberance in their thinking and of wanting to share him with the world, called Jesus the only Son of God. In the ancient world, rulers were often said to have titles like that. They were said to be born of a virgin. It was natural to understand Jesus in these terms in that culture and to incorporate them into the stories about him. After all, He had to be as good as or equal to these other rabbis and gurus and prophets, if not better. And so there's a certain amount of hyperbole that gets put into the texts about Jesus and these mythological stories that the people were familiar with back then. And so they used those same stories to talk about Jesus. And yet, Jesus called himself a Son of Man, and as pointed out in the Gospels of Thomas and the 4 canonical Gospels, we are all called sons and daughters of God. He didn't claim any exceptional title or status for himself. And while progressive Christians might find that God is beautifully defined by Jesus, we know that God is not confined to Jesus. So I want to repeat that. God is beautifully defined by Jesus, but not confined to Jesus. In other words, he's a wonderful image. He's a wonderful mirror for who and what God is. But it's not confined even to that one image. And so we are comfortable following Jesus while affirming other authentic spiritual paths and persons and being enriched by them. We include those here at Unity. We model how all traditional religions can evolve to higher levels without having to leave their own unique path. We don't put down other spiritual leaders or some of the wonderful rituals and practices that other traditions have. And Jesus, likewise, didn't dismiss his own religion. Instead, he offered a more evolved version of it for his time. And so must we. Even today, as we look at Unity, we have to look and see, okay, are we contemporary? Are we current? Have we learned some things that maybe are not that true? Maybe we're a little superstitious too. Maybe we need to let go of some things. And so he offered an evolved version of Judaism to the people of his time. And the model that he showed us how to do that is also relevant to us in our time. Writers of the New Testament sometimes strayed from the universality of Jesus. They made him exclusive, and they regressed to a more narrow understanding of him. And so when we see that in the scriptures, we can confidently follow Jesus' own model for interpreting his Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, where he embraced some of it, he ignored part of it, and he downright rejected some of it, namely the portrayals of God that were less than loving. If you remember, he said, "You've been taught to love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, you must love your enemy too." So he had this inner wisdom and knowing and confidence to be able to speak the truth when he felt that what was being shared with the people wasn't fully the truth. And so to follow Jesus is to make the inner presence and connection, that inner dimension of God, a discerner of all things biblical that can reject those things that are less than Christ-like, that don't reflect the highest consciousness of the Christ or of love that we see in the Gospels. Once we let go of all claims to exclusivity and narrow theologies, we can embrace God's light in many loving paths. We can embrace a truly universal Jesus whose Christ, or anointed consciousness, flows through all of creation by whatever name we want to call it. Then we can genuinely enjoy the lovely stories around the birth of Jesus as pictures of adoration and love with no sense of exclusivity or exceptionality. Jesus is central in the Christian tradition in our understanding and experience of God. However, even in the Christian path, the intimate dimension of God goes beyond Jesus and includes all of us. The meaningful way God may come close to us in many different ways, such as Mother, Father, Beloved, Sacred Presence, Holy One, Lover, Mary, Angel, or Friend. The intimate dimension of God is really full. It's broad. It's wonderful. And Jesus did not limit his own divine guidance to the one that he called Abba. He sought out heavenly guidance from long dead people like Moses and Elijah, as we see in the scripture. In more contemporary times, we have examples like Mother Teresa, and she found that intimate presence of God in the desperate people in the gutters of Calcutta. St. Francis found it in the birds and the animals and in the forest. So we can find this intimate dimension of God and divine guidance in any meaningful relationship. Person, animal, Mother Earth. It's all around us. The intimacy of God is available to us. And that's really why this creche nativity scene is what it is. It's got stars, it's got the sky, it's got a city, it's got animals, and in a day or two it will have the representation of each one of us. It's a full diorama of God in manifestation. And in the new Christmas story, the God of three dimensions came from beyond us to walk beside us, to bring alive the reality of God in, as, and through us. The new story is that God has been incarnating for 13.7 billion years, not just 2,000 years ago. And God continues to take human form in you and me, and in every baby that's being born in the world right now at this moment. That's the wonder of real 3D. People of all traditions and those of none can join Christians to celebrate the birth of Jesus and what it represents. As a prototype of evolved humanity, he came to tell us all that at our deepest, truest self, we are timeless, transcendent spirits walking on an earthly path for a brief time within the span of eternity. We're involved in a stunning story of cosmic love between ourselves and the Creator, which has an amazing ending. We become fully God, infinite, eternal, and endlessly co-creative. So if Jesus is not an Old Testament figure of atoning sacrifice for us, what is he? The historical person of Jesus of Nazareth, or Yeshua ben Joseph, is a prototype of what it means to be awakened to our own humanity and divinity. The classic Christian creeds seem to get it right when they define Jesus as fully human and fully divine. However, they are limited if they understand that the only expression of that is Jesus, rather than including other great spiritual leaders and people, and ultimately all of us. Jesus is different from us only in degree, not in kind. We are the same kind. He is just maybe a little more evolved than all of us, but we are on the path of evolution. And that is why Christmas is not just about Jesus' birth, but equally about our awakening, our rebirth to an awareness of our own true selves. And so what is important is that we are on that Jesus path. Whatever, spiritual practices, whatever path that he was on that helped him to wake up, that's what we want to be on. We want to be on that path. We're following in his footsteps in that sense to awaken to our full divinity, to our mission and to our purpose in the same way that he did. And that's really what it means to be born again. We were born humanly, we understood ourselves as having a human father and mother and a family, and then we wake up to the realization that we have an even more incredible spiritual father, mother, and family. And we gather with them every Sunday. We didn't come this far to come only this far. Get what I'm saying? We must go further. We must push on and culminate the journey, bring it to its full conclusion, because that's what it's about. It's great that we're on this path together, but let us remember that we're here to fully embody the light and the divine presence. Because what we call the Christ, our awakened self, is our hope of glory. It's what we ultimately become. So the nativity story applies to us equally as it does to Jesus or Yeshua. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. The donkey, the cattle, the sheep, the shepherds, the wise men, all equally come in adoration of us and of our creation. And this Christmas story, this Jesus story, is our story. Make no mistake about it. So take time to read the account of the Nativity and see it as being about you, foretelling your birth, announcing your arrival, proclaiming your magnificence. And let yourself hear the angels singing at your birth. Don't shrink or hide away. Stand tall out in the light of the fullness of your being. Don't play the game of inadequacy or incompleteness or separateness. Marion Williamson, in A Return to Love, has a beautiful passage. You've heard it many times. And it says, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us the most. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So this Christmas, I encourage us and invoke us to let that presence shine. So let's take these words into time of meditation.